Now, let us begin the second session of the MIKTA Academic Dialogue in 2020. I would like to welcome all participants and audiences. This session will be led by Ajin CHOI, professor at Yonsei University. From now on, I will hand over microphone to Professor CHOI.
Okay, thank you for your introduction. I am Ajin CHOI, professor at Yonsei University, Seoul. And I will serve as a moderator for the second session, COVID-19 and promoting multilateralism and global health security. Before actually this session starts, I would like to thank the KAIS president, Professor Lee Sang-hwan, and conference organizers for inviting me to this timely and important meeting. As you know, the first session discussed the macro level change and prospects of the post-COVID global order. But this second session will more focus on the practical and more concrete issues by looking at the role of the MIKTA in promoting multilateral health governance and cooperation. I hope this panel can provide and exchange important ideas and eventually produce the constructive policy alternatives. This session, we have 2 presenters and 3 discussants. So I'm happy to introduce all the panelists. And then first panelist is the Professor Fitriani from Indonesia University. And the second presenter is the Professor Emel Parlar at Marmara University in Turkey. And the first discussant is Hyunjin Choi, Kyung University, Korea. And the second discussant is the Byrne from Griffith University from Australia. And then last discussant is the Professor Erika Sandoval at CIDE in Mexico. I'm very happy to see all of you here. And then therefore, I would like to ask our first presenters to speak. And then the title of her presentation is MIKTA Multilateral Cooperation in the Pandemic Era. Professor Fitriani, could you start, please?
Thank you, Professor Choi. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for the conference organizer who already invited me for this important webinar. I'm pleased from Jakarta. I would like to send a very warm greetings to all of you. My presentation is about actually I put question mark at the end of my title. So I'm kind of asking, can MIKTA form a multilateral cooperation to tackle challenges resulted from this pandemic? But to explain my thoughts better, I would like to use the slide. So I will share with you my slides. Can you see the slides? Yes, okay. So I put question mark at the end, but let me explain. Yeah, I will go through very quickly. Should be 5 steps. Just would like to see, before I'm looking at MIKTA, I would like to see the world in this pandemic era, which is very special time in our history. And whether I would like to thankful or not, we are now in this kind of circumstances. And from previous session this morning, there have been a discussion, if I cannot see it's a debate about whether MIKTA still have time to materialize or to be a middle power. But I'm kind of agree with those who think that there is always possibility. Big powers competition is not the whole world. There is still room for MIKTA, for middle power to maneuver and to find a way. And this is what I understand, my understanding of the international relation in pandemic era. we suddenly in the crisis of global healthcare system, not only in one or two countries, but across the country, not only in underdeveloped countries, but even in the most advanced country experience that. So this is the first. And the second, we found that state very much inward looking now. Even the countries that used to be form a coalition or even in a regional institutions, you can see people, countries now try to prioritize their own needs and national interests. And vaccine nationalism is one of the example of that. And of course, we then, because of this problem, we are following, we are watching now and experiencing now global economic crisis. And on the top of all those very difficult circumstances, we can still see the continuing strategic competition between major powers. It is not only in the problem of the competing on the vaccine and blaming where the virus come from, but also on the area that should not be discussed or not become the problem in this time, like things in South China Sea. So this is a very, very difficult circumstances, and we experience because our session will tackle on this pandemic era. I would like to see the problem of our global health system. For sure, we have capitalization of health services and medical equipments, and it's very much remarkable because our world also have a majority of the world is poor and do not have enough access or good access to the health service and medical equipments, and we have seen that not only in major countries but also in small countries. Not only in small countries, but also in major countries happen. And we can still see the future is not free from health problems. And some of the epidemiologists already predict that there will be more and some more epidemic in the future. So actually, what I think what we need is the need for fair and inclusive global health governance. So our session this time is very, I think, indeed very in time. How about MIKTA? Some discussion this morning has this morning's session already saw some debate, but this is my position. We each of our countries, MIKTA, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia, overwhelmed by our domestic health and economic problems. Not only because it is we are not ready, but also there are so many complications domestically, and not only pressure from external, but also pressure from internal society, especially in the domestic democratic country. I found it's democratic country is more difficult, at least for Indonesia. It is much more difficult to handle this issue in a democratic circumstances. If you are in a authoritarian system, maybe it's easy to just impose rules and ban people and lock down, but not in democratic country. You will get a lot of protests and so. So this is very challenging. But amidst that circumstances, MIKTA countries still struggle for strategic autonomy, and this somehow was related to the debate this morning in the first session about whether MIKTA can be autonomy apart from those two major powers. But for my position is yes, somehow we struggle for the strategic autonomy, but some manage to get it, but some not. We have to go. I don't think generalization for all middle powers that cannot avoid that bipolar circumstances is the right thing to say. But for me, some of the middle powers manage to get it. That's depend on the tradition, philosophy, and history of that country. Some countries do not see the possibility to be more independent because they've never independent since their existence in their country. But some country manage to get experience and to be more strategically autonomy in their history. So this is my, and unfortunately, our MIKTA is not a close partnership. It is an association last several years, but it is not yet a close partnership. Unless for some cases, and this is more on bilateral base, like Indonesia and Korea is quite close, and we have strategic partnership. And during this pandemic, Korea helped Indonesia with some of the medical equipments. Indonesia also have special relation with Australia. We have also a strategic partnership. We just finished SEPA. But apart from that, as a part of MIKTA, 5 countries working together, I don't think we have achieved what has been expected before. So in this kind of circumstances, can we, MIKTA, promote multilateral cooperation in order to work especially toward the a better global health system? I think we have to see our strength. And our strength is still relevant as a group of middle power. MIKTA, I think, still relevant. Apart from a lot of pessimism, yes, I think still relevant because it is the time when the multilateral is needed. And who has the potential to do it? Middle power. Who else? Small power will be much more difficult. So as a country that have some capability, especially, and also leading in their respective region, MIKTA is still a relevant a group of middle powers. And the second, the strength of MIKTA is the power of network. We have a lot of network already. Indonesia with Korea, Indonesia with Australia, Indonesia with Turkey have quite a lot of that. Maybe with Mexico, because of the distance quite far away, not as developed as the network relations with Korea and Australia. But I'm sure with more interaction and even discussion like this already put up in some networks. So I think the power of network among MIKTA has been growing. And the third one, we have a soft image. We are not such a aggressive, not in an aggressive mood. We are friendly countries, and we would like to cooperate. So this is, I think, important. And countries in MIKTA are generally flexible. We have a flexible approach, and somehow we have a realistic goals because we understand that we are not big power. So we would like to target what we possibly can achieve. Finally, the strength of MIKTA is some countries in MIKTA, if not all, have some innovation of healthcare and develop medical health industries. I would like to mention Korea and Australia for this aspect because those 2 countries already experience more advanced economy, and so they have more advanced healthcare and medical industries too. But I'm sure the pandemic also pushed countries like Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey to also think and invest more on their healthcare system. So we can expect a better response to this health system. So, but we have also a lot of challenges. Even though I'm not 100% pessimist, I can still see some problems in MIKTA's collaboration to provide or to build a fair and inclusive global health system. First is some of us, not all, have a close link or even dependent on major powers. It is unavoidable in this kind of circumstances, but the closeness with the major power somehow challenge the strategic autonomy of MIKTA countries. And the second is lack of pooling resources. Apart from intellectual discussion, or almost there is no pooling resources among MIKTA countries. So this is so loose, so loose, and maybe because of that, maybe it is not time yet. It is only several years. This association only several years. So maybe we still need time to develop this kind of association. And because maybe we are in different area, there is still thin common interest. there's countries like Indonesia, Korea, and Australia that have more interaction in ASEAN in East Asia Summit, but and even in ASEAN Plus 3 or ASEAN Plus 1. But apart from that, especially with Mexico and Turkey, the interest is still very, very thin. There is maybe because each of us very engaged in our respective area. And the fourth is there are also other mechanisms, regional associations. So MIKTA is not the I have to say MIKTA is not the first priority for Indonesia, for example. ASEAN is the first priority for collaboration, and ASEAN Plus 3, ASEAN Plus 1 is another mechanism that we still think as a priority. MIKTA maybe come after that. So it is not the association that become the first priority if it comes to our foreign policy. So there, and don't forget, there's also still bilateral mechanism and other multilateral forum. So the existence of MIKTA in a country like Indonesia is still being questioned. Because of that, MIKTA have a weak coalition. So cooperation like us, like this, what we are doing now among the scholars is, I think, one of the good steps to enhance MIKTA existence to face these challenges. So I would like to conclude my presentation with two things. One is that COVID-19 pandemic has created multifaceted global crisis that threaten not only future survival of the state, but also the human being ourselves. And under these circumstances, it is to compete for their interest and create magnitude challenge. And these circumstances create magnitude challenge to multilateralism. But nevertheless, it is a general knowledge that if we would like to survive, we have to collaborate. So, and multilateral cooperation is the best way to do it. And MIKTA has frequently overlooked. MIKTA has frequently overlooked potential. We have a lot of potential, but often frequently overlooked. So it is maybe this time is a good time. Crisis usually push and drive a lot of opportunity. So it is time for MIKTA to realize its potential and to promote, especially to promote multilateral cooperation. However, MIKTA have individual problems and collective weaknesses to material its promise. So it's kind of challenge but also opportunity. And I think two things is in the front of MIKTA that, if possible, we should collaborate. One is about to create fair and inclusive global governance, and the second is how to tackle this financial crisis. With this, I would like to stop, and thank you very much for your patience and your attention. Thank you. I will now send back to Professor Choi. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. And Professor Fitriani shows that in the face of the pandemic crisis, the world is becoming more polarized, and less developed countries has no enough capabilities or resources, while the great powers is more focused on the domestic agendas and also, focus on the competition with each other, increasing protectionism and national sentiment. She also points out that under this circumstance, the middle powers has strengths, but at the same time, weakness in overcoming this, pandemic crisis. Okay, thank you for your presentation. Our next presenter is the Professor Emel Parlar at Marmara University in Turkey. Okay, it's nice to see you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Korean Association of International Studies for having organized such a great academic event on MIKTA and its future. And also, I would like to thank you for having invited me to this event. As the title of my, I don't know if the technical staff will share because they told me yesterday that they'll share my PowerPoint presentation, but anyway, I'll share it myself. Is it okay now? Okay. Just,
yes.
Could you see it?
Yes.
Okay. But I have to. Sorry, I think there is a problem here. Sorry. Okay. As the title of my presentation suggests, I'll talk about middle powers and their role and their potentialities and limitations in global health governance more specifically. And of course, as we will focus on MIKTA, I will focus on MIKTA as our case study. Let's look at the outline of my presentation. First of all, I will talk about a little bit, of course, and about the revival of middle power diplomacy, and I will investigate whether we will be able to investigate whether MIKTA can contribute to this revival and whether can MIKTA increase its visibility and status in global governance in this post-corona era. Then I will try to draw a general picture of MIKTAs and MIKTA countries' position in global health governance, and I'll provide some inward and outward looking patterns of MIKTA and MIKTA members' position in global health governance. Then I'll investigate whether global health governance can be a new niche diplomacy area for MIKTA. Of course, here I will talk about its potentialities and limitations. And in the last part, I will try to give some recommendations. In this part, I will start by saying that the coronavirus pandemic has made clear that there is room for middle powers to play a greater role in global governance, especially in global health governance. So my departing point is that, and I believe that, and I argue that the ongoing strategic unraveling in the international system may allow middle powers to create a common ground for both improving political and economic ties among states and encouraging trade and investment and combating global problems. So I am on the optimistic side, and I think that there is still room for middle powers to revive and to come together and to respond together to global challenges like COVID-19 virus. On the other hand, they have, of course, some limitations. First of all, middle powers will do better if they pool their resources to create a multilateralist league that will serve as an external bloc. And as you know, established institutions are too much reliant on US and China. And US and China dispute is widening, and structures outside US and China, Chinese participations are becoming even more important for an effective global governance. So for an effective multilateralism, we need other structures, we need other powers who will engage in this new multilateral era. So MIKTA, I argue that MIKTA is one of these platforms as an informal international institution. It has potential to take concrete steps and it can reinforce post-COVID alliances and partnerships among emerging and middle powers. As a group being composed of middle powers, of course, we generally in literature, we contextualize MIKTA as a middle power grouping, middle power institution. It can revive middle power activism in two main areas: global and sustainable development and global health governance. In fact, since 2013, since its foundation, MIKTA has failed to create impact both among its members and in other international institutions and platforms. For instance, a good sign of MIKTA's failure in club governance is that its members do not still organize side events or mini summits in the G20 annual summits, as did the BRICS countries. In short, MIKTA is not sufficiently visible in other formal international institutions like UN. It's not too visible in UN General Assembly, for example, and in other UN institutions, funds, and agencies, and also in the G20. However, I still believe that there is still room for MIKTA to revive and to play distinct roles in the post-COVID era, as did Canada and Australia in the post-Second World War. Now I will look at the inward and outward patterns of MIKTA's power in global governance, because in this session we will mainly focus on global governance, global health governance. Here I'm using a table, and I try to compare MIKTA's members' inward patterns. So I put their total deaths, current assessment of SDG 3, SDG trend, position, and also I put their current health expenditure per capita, and also I look at whether they have universal health coverage or not. As you know, COVID-19 outbreak has clearly shown the importance of state capacity and resilience of nation health systems, and domestic health policies of states have determined both how they responded to COVID-19 outbreak and at what degree they have been affected by the virus. So we must first of all look at whether MIKTA members succeeded in responding to the COVID-19 outbreak. So as you see in the table, Korea and Australia appear as the top 2 countries among 5 MIKTA countries who have successfully achieved the SDG 3 target and efficiently managed the COVID crisis. Among 5 MIKTA countries, these 2 countries have the lowest mortality rate. On the other hand, Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey stand as MIKTA countries who have been respectively the most negatively affected by the COVID-19 in terms of number of deaths caused by the virus. In terms of their SDG 3 performance, these 3 countries appear to have the lowest performance. I'm talking about Mexico, Indonesia, and Turkey, of course, in achieving SDG 3, while Korea and Australia maintain the highest SDG 3 achievement. SDG 3 refers to the health sector, of course. In case MIKTA members can sign health cooperation agreements among each other and further foster their knowledge and experience sharing in health sector, it's likely that their capacity to take action against the future outbreaks would considerably improve. So a significant increase in the health capacity of MIKTA countries will certainly make the grouping bring the global governance, global health governance to the agenda of the other international organizations, formal or informal, and push MIKTA to launch projects for the third countries willing to improve their domestic health capacity. COVID-19 outbreak has also negatively influenced the implementation of SDG 3 at the national level. So countries like MIKTA members have potential to help the third countries to improve their national capacities and surveillance capacities. When I look at the universal health coverage of the MIKTA members, all the MIKTA members have universal health coverage. Among these 5 MIKTA members, Mexico appears the one who achieved universal health coverage the most recently. In 2019, Indonesia, I think, could achieve universal health coverage, although it has some financing problems regarding universal health coverage. When I look at the outward looking patterns of MIKTA in global health governance, first of all, I look at MIKTA's commitment to global health governance. Here I look at the MIKTA foreign ministers' joint statements on COVID-19, and I compare this recent commitment with MIKTA's commitment on Ebola outbreak in 2014. And in my paper also, I compare MIKTA's commitment to global health governance with the joint statement made by BRICS in June 2020. When I compare these 2 statements, MIKTA's statement on COVID-19 and BRICS statement on COVID-19, I found out that BRICS statement proposed much more concrete solutions to respond to the crisis in a joint way. But in general, their focus is similar. They focus on better trade relations and they try to find common responses to cover their trade laws. And different from MIKTA's statement, BRICS statement suggested MIKTA's statement underlined the necessity to use their emergency loan system, and also they pointed out that a new development bank could help BRICS countries affected by the virus some sort of new funds. So these are related with the MIKTA's commitment to global health governance. And as a second step in this part, I look at MIKTA countries' voluntary contribution to the World Health Organization. In my opinion, and as I studied these in my previous projects, countries' voluntary contribution to World Health Organization or to global governance is very much important to understand whether they would like to play greater role in some specific issue areas. So this voluntary contribution, is a sign of countries' willingness to play a role in this specific issue area. So when I look at this commitment of voluntary contribution of MIKTA countries, I see that South Korea took the first place. Then it is followed by Australia, Turkey, Indonesia, and Mexico. And so Mexico appears to be the lowest voluntary contributor to World Health Organization. Here, perhaps I have a table, so you can see the numbers. Here, I couldn't find relevant data regarding Mexico's voluntary contribution to World Health Organization. So when you look at the data, you'll understand which countries have willingness to play greater role in World Health Organization. So in this part, I'll talk a little bit about the potentialities and limitations of MIKTA, and I'll investigate whether global health governance can be a new niche diplomacy area for the grouping. I think we must, first of all, keep in mind that during the pandemic, intergroup relations of MIKTA were fostered as a result of the increasing exchange of medical supplies and the knowledge sharing among MIKTA members, which can be considered a positive result of MIKTA's multilateralism. And I argue that multilateralism is very important for fostering multilateralism. Informal governance, on the other hand, is very much important for an effective multilateralism. So as a scholar, I think that if these multilateral groupings, the activities of multilateral groupings develop, we could have much more efficient multilateral governance. In this regard, if MIKTA establishes linkages between its global development agenda and its global health diplomacy and succeeds in establishing a human security network composed of states and NGOs, it would raise its profile and visibility in global governance. So these are the positive sides of MIKTA's contribution to, or MIKTA's capacities regarding global in health governance. International development, as you know, is one of the priorities of MIKTA as a grouping, and 2/3 of MIKTA's declarations, joint statements, are related with international and sustainable development. And if MIKTA could succeed in establishing a linkage between these two niche areas, global development and global health governance, I think it could find room to move ahead in this new issue area. Another aspect regarding potentiality of MIKTA is the fact that international development assistance is needed so that developing countries can make rapid progress in building national surveillance capacities. And I think that MIKTA countries, with their extensive capabilities and networks in the field of development assistance, might help developing countries increase their national capacities to take control and manage outbreaks by increasing health sector allocations in their individual development aid. MIKTA countries may also consider including private aid into their broader development assistance. The inclusion of special assistance may be effective in both promoting general health and using human development tools effectively. So I think that MIKTA countries are important players in the international development area, and if they could collaborate in this specific issue area to give common response to the third countries which have less resources, I think MIKTA can increase its status as a club in global governance. So what is next for MIKTA in the post-pandemic time? Here I will try to give some recommendations for MIKTA's adaptation to the new era. The pandemic has proven right that middle powers have capacity to balance their economic vulnerabilities with resilience, especially in the global health sector. And the assessment of MIKTA's inward and outward looking shows that MIKTA has potential to play a larger role in global health governance. If global health governance will be added to MIKTA's agenda as a new policy area, despite its risks, of course, it can help energize and transform the platform into the post-pandemic era. The pandemic has proven right that middle powers have capacity to balance their economic vulnerabilities with their strong health sector, as I said. MIKTA, if MIKTA countries and MIKTA itself can succeed in narrowing the gap between its rhetoric and practice, it can assume new responsibilities in global health governance, most particularly in the field of development assistance for health. And this can make MIKTA more visible and operational in global health governance. I am also suggesting or recommending to MIKTA members to think about the creation of a fund similar to BRICS emergency assistance loan. Of course, they have all budgetary restrictions, but they can discuss whether it's possible to have such an emergency loan as BRICS countries did or fund. And this kind of loan may also help MIKTA countries comply with their G20 commitments and strengthen global health diplomacy within the G20. MIKTA may also prepare a global health work program in order to encourage joint dialogue and participation within the G20 by working in coordination with key actors such as the World Health Organization and the World Bank, who influence the global health agenda. In addition to this, if MIKTA members take decisive steps to reinforce cooperation within the grouping in order to reach the targets of Agenda 2030, and actively engage in health financing and development support programs, MIKTA can update its status as an informal institution aiming to contribute to the strengthening of rules-based multilateralism. Last but not least, global health governance has now become truly multipolar, with many players with converging and diverging interests. In what ways informal international institutions can contribute to global health governance still remains as an underexplored topic. So as scholars, if we can debate and analyze more this kind of topics, I think we can also contribute to the strengthening of MIKTA in global governance, and we can also contribute to the increasing of its image and visibility in the changing global governance. MIKTA, in this sense, may be a good research topic for two main reasons. First, its members have a good record of dealing with the pandemic compared to some higher income countries in the West. Second, MIKTA needs a revival so as to be an effective club, which can take new initiatives in specific policy areas such as sustainable development and global health governance. However, in order to be a legitimate actor in the eyes of international public opinion, MIKTA members must also work harder so that their COVID-19 policies will not result in both weakening of democratic norms and practices and the strengthening of authoritarian politics in their own countries and elsewhere. Thank you very much for having listened.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. And Professor Parlar argues that with respect to the global health governance, MIKTA countries individually have specific capacity to combat against the pandemic, And at the same time, the nature of the middle power diplomacy has merits in promoting multilateral cooperation in global health governance. Sorry. And now we actually move on to the discussion sections. And the first discussant is the Professor Hyunjin CHOI from Kyung University, Korea. He will give the comments on the first paper, the Professor Fitriani's presentation. And could you start, please?
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Hyunjin CHOI from Kyung University. First of all, it's my great honor to speak on this important topic in this uncertain time of pandemic crisis. So now I'm going to discuss about Professor Fitriani's presentation about multilateral cooperation. So she pointed out some important issues about some challenges for multilateral cooperation, such as inward-looking countries seeking selfish interests, and also many countries are seeking strategic competition as well. So these problems pose a lot of challenges for fair and inclusive multilateral cooperation. As noted by Professor Fitriani, this pandemic crisis can be overcome only through multilateral cooperation. And I believe that no one would deny the importance of fair and inclusive global health governance in this uncertain time. And we, the members of MIKTA, must take a progress towards such an ideal, but the reality is much more complicated. So in this discussion, I want to introduce some kind of challenges against this ideal. And today, the biggest challenge for global health governance could be how to share and distribute coronavirus vaccine, and which might be available by the end of this year or early next year. Some countries, such as US, China, and the United Kingdom, have secured their own supplies through bilateral deals with vaccine developers ahead of anyone else. And for example, the United Kingdom has pre-ordered enough vaccine for about 5 doses per person. And many newspapers and magazines call this behavior as vaccine nationalism or vaccine hoarding. And the WHO also gave a warning that the vaccine nationalism will prolong the pandemic rather than shorten this crisis. And also the Science magazine said that those vaccines will eventually reach most countries in the world, but only after powerful countries have protected their own people. So the question is, can we achieve fair and inclusive allocation of COVID vaccine? And as for now, unfortunately, the answer seems to be negative for the following reasons. And first reason is, the COVID vaccine are private goods. So unlike public goods, those private goods are sold by private companies to earn profit and fulfill the needs of their buyers. And both public goods and private goods are for the benefit of consumers, but while public goods benefit everyone, private goods are only for those who can make a payment. And theories of international relations, especially in realism, suggest that achieving multilateral cooperation is much harder when countries are concerned with private goods. And the second problem is domestic politics. Access to coronavirus vaccine has become a priority in domestic politics. In many countries, issues surrounding this COVID crisis has become a domestic political problem. And in the United States, even the issue of where to wear masks or not has become a topic for political debate. And for leaders of high-income countries, especially in democratic countries, securing enough amounts of vaccine as a way to recover from economic damage at home is important for their approval ratings and elections. So I think this domestic politics make matters worse. And the third issue is the balance of power politics has returned to international relations. The strategic rivalry between US, China, and possibly Russia is shaping national response to COVID-19 crisis in a selfish manner. And a recent New York Times article introduced a story about spying activities between the three great powers in the cyberspace, targeting vaccine research facilities in the United States. So in this era of new geopolitical rivalry, we may rephrase old statements of Kenneth Walsh, a great political scientist. So maybe I can say like this: when faced with the possibility of cooperating for COVID vaccine, states that feel insecure must ask how the vaccine will be divided. And they ask not, will both of us gain, but who will gain more? So this kind of strategic rivalry and the return of a balance of power politics makes international cooperation for this COVID crisis difficult. And for these reasons, as of now, I think the fair and inclusive distribution of COVID vaccine will be difficult to achieve. But nevertheless, there is some improvement in multilateral cooperation for global health. And I think this is where we, the middle-income countries, can make a meaningful contribution. So let me give you one example. So recently, led by WHO, more than 170 countries around the world have now joined the Global Vaccine Allocation Plan called COVAX. Its goal is to help buy and distribute vaccinations fairly around the world, including low-income countries. Unfortunately, the three great powers, US, China, and Russia, and those countries are also the leaders of vaccine development, and they abstained from this initiative. But in the absence of great powers, the MIKTA and major countries such as Germany, UK, and Japan also joined this effort. And we pledged money to have access to a broader range of vaccine candidates. So as the middle power countries, and we have an advanced technology and a lot of experience and knowledge of controlling this infectious disease. And also we have advanced manufacturing facilities for vaccine. And therefore, although it is a tough time for international cooperation, but we can make a contribution for the fair and inclusive distribution of vaccine. And also, we need to remember that without global cooperation, the virus will continue spreading. And therefore, this crisis can give us a lot of challenges for multilateral cooperation. But still, there's some opportunity that middle power countries can make a contribution.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Professor Choi. And then Professor Choi's comments focuses on the feasibility and the effectiveness of the multilateral cooperation in this topic. And then next discussant is the Professor Byrne at Griffith University from Australia. Could you start, please, Professor Byrne?
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Is that coming through all right? Great. Excellent. Look, good afternoon, all. It's such a pleasure to be joining you and being part of this virtual dialogue. I'm joining you from Brisbane in Australia, and I'd like to extend my thanks very much and congratulations to the CHOI Foundation for hosting this dialogue in their year as MIKTA chair. It's really good to be a part of it. And Professor Choi, thank you for your excellent chairing, and to all the panelists, really pleased to be part of this discussion. Given that I am sitting here in Brisbane, Australia, I'd like to begin my intervention with an Australian protocol by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm joining you today. Here in Brisbane, that's the Turrbal and the Jagera peoples. and in the spirit of reconciliation, pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that to all First Nations peoples around the globe. That's something we do in Australia fairly routinely these days, but it's an acknowledgement that I don't make at all lightly. And in particular, I'd like to do that to really highlight the relevance of traditional knowledge and local wisdom, particularly from our Indigenous communities, and the responsibility that we have in Australia, but across MIKTA nations, to highlight and integrate that into our contemporary problem-solving frameworks. So I'd like to just say today's discussion has really been excellent, and I think it's offered us a valuable opportunity to think about MIKTA and what it stands for and what it might achieve in a post-COVID world, but also to think about what it means to be a middle power, and how this connection of nations actually makes sense. Maybe I was a little bit like Phillips Vermont. He mentioned earlier in the day that he was a little bit skeptical about the power of MIKTA, and I've probably been a little bit in that same boat. And then I was thinking about my own personal experiences living in Australia, having been posted to Mexico and spending a couple of years there. Today, in my current role with the Asia Institute, working very closely with our biggest neighbour, Indonesia, but also working with colleagues in Korea and colleagues right across the Asia Pacific region. And I'm also involved in an engagement group with the G20, the W20, which was really put forward into action by Turkey. So it's interesting when you start to think about the connections that exist. In many ways, they are uneven. Those common interests can be difficult to find, and perhaps they are, much like Evie Fitriani mentioned earlier, a little bit thin on the ground, but nonetheless, they are there and evident in different activities that I think each of these nations is engaged in. And I think that's something really positive to work with. And I would note that Jeffrey Robertson this morning talked in a fairly pessimistic way about the nature of the connections and what MIKTA might achieve. But I thought in finishing, he was spot on in saying, if we are to make this work, we have to invest in effort into the kinds of dialogues we're having, at what level they are happening at. We have to invest effort into the way that we can support each other, including at the moment, in a current environment where ministries of foreign affairs are under increasing pressure and cost to save money, to produce efficiency dividends, without necessarily domestic constituencies to support them. And additionally, where diplomacy is increasingly undervalued, diplomacy not just in its traditional sense, but of course across a number of public dimensions as well. And I think Korea is well placed to advance that sense of value in diplomacy. So I think we are in a really difficult situation today in rethinking or reimagining the kind of contribution that MIKTA might make in a post-COVID world, indeed, not just in responding to COVID-19, but in recovery from it. And to this end, I've been asked to comment on my fellow panelist Emel's paper. And I have to say, I'm in complete agreement with your paper, Emel. I thought, you know, what you have done is given us a pathway, a model for thinking about what MIKTA might take forward in the next couple of years, with a particular focus on niche diplomacy through the lens of health governance. I thought that the approach that you've taken to actually justifying this idea, looking at the inward and outward patterns of activity, of compliance, of behaviour, is absolutely critical. And one of the things that I had noticed in going over the past 7 years worth of MIKTA activity and dialogue, whether it was at a foreign minister level, at a senior official level, or at an academic level, there is such an emphasis on very idealistic, lofty statements of commitment and shared values, but very little self-reflection on where each of these nations might be actually coming in to an issue from. And I think it's particularly important for us today in a world where national and domestic priorities are often very blurred with our international activity and behaviours and priorities. We have to find a way to actually look both inwardly and examine our priorities inwardly and our behaviours and outcomes, and what that means and says about our international behaviours. So I think that's actually a model that could be taken forward in the MIKTA process. It's something that we also see at play in the G20 process, and there is excellent work done by the G20 Research Organisation to map and monitor compliance of G20 nations with the commitments that they make through the Leaders' Summit each year. And I think that's something that we should be applying if MIKTA is to move forward and to be practical and to have impact on the ground. I would absolutely agree, and I think Emel was reflecting the discussion from earlier in the day as well, that when you look at what MIKTA has achieved, it is uneven, it is patchy, and impact and effectiveness is not particularly evident in any given field. There are some good statements that have been made, but if you look at the activities, particularly around the edges of large multilateral fora, you know, it's a very weak kind of contribution. And that could well be because of an agenda that is simply too unwieldy, that changes from year to year, and that is often driven from issue to issue. So by focusing in on a common issue of concern, and global health, governance and security, I think, is one that is not just relevant but timely, where there are complementarities across the different nations, and I think Emel has demonstrated that, but there are also gaps, both in domestic and international behaviours, where MIKTA may well have an opportunity to drive the agenda forward in a constructive way. And I would also agree that the G20 provides a mechanism that each of the MIKTA nations can contribute to, not just through the leaders fora and through the different task forces within that G20 structure, but also through those different engagement groups, whether that is civil society, business, looking at women and looking at young people, all groups that have particular interests in how we handle health, governance and security going forward. And some of those groups that are particularly vulnerable, and I'm thinking in particular about women, business in a small SME and micro capacity, and young people. So in fact, potentially, rather than the UN, it is in the G20 that the MIKTA coalition derives the greatest strength. So if I were to add a couple of things to this particular health governance agenda going forward, and nothing here is out of step with what Emel has put forward already, potentially just to accentuate or highlight additional ideas, I would suggest there's a real opportunity here to widen the dialogue beyond political leaders, beyond senior officials that tend to be in a very general capacity, towards experts. Academics in the international relations and diplomacy space, sure, but also experts in our science and health spaces as well. Potentially even also to, if we're thinking about global health governance, to looking at how hospitals, you know, where can we bring a dialogue between hospitals that are achieving outcomes on the ground as well, so that they can share best practice and knowledge. And there are those networks, particularly through the One Health network, that exist that could really be developed. Secondly, I think looking to innovative collaborations, again, not just talking about what we're each doing in a research perspective, but actually looking to fund and drive forward collaborative research and practice, again, focusing in on that health, hospital, community health space. And that could also incorporate an emphasis on vaccine development. And I thought the last intervention around vaccines is quite a critical and important one that should be included in this discussion. Thirdly, again, to unlock and mobilise capital. We often ask and look to governments to contribute funds for capital investment. I think we should also be involving the private sector in these conversations, and philanthropic organisations as well, and thinking creatively about how those funds might be utilised and invested for collaborative outcomes. And finally, to communicate outcomes more widely. One of the things that I think became very clear through the COVID pandemic is that our risk communication in times of pandemics is poor and very fragmented. And we can actually develop much more coherent standards and practices within a WHO framework under the international health regulations to improve the kind of risk communication that is disseminated from the highest levels right out to grassroots communities. MIKTA, with a focus on global health governance, could contribute to that space. Finally, just to conclude, I think this is an important agenda item, not just because it's timely and relevant now, but because MIKTA is at a point in its existence where being able to demonstrate a track record, being able to demonstrate a common purpose and outcomes is critical to its ongoing existence. But I don't think it should stop there. And I think if we are able to strategize and cast forward, there is an opportunity to lift ambition. Human health cannot be considered in isolation. And the devastating and unprecedented impact of COVID-19 underscores the urgency for global cooperation, not just in this health space, but across social, economic, and environmental challenges. So looking at how we might underpin human with planetary health could be something that MIKTA might contribute to in the future. As governments shift from their response into a recovery mode and think about the opportunities for cooperation, we might think about the opportunity to deliver a double dividend outcome, maximising the investments that we're each making now into economic recovery to achieve better health outcomes, but also climate-friendly, sustainable growth on local, regional and global scales. And the need for this has never been more compelling. Australia and Indonesia have some good examples where they're operating together in some of these areas. I think that can easily be shared across the MIKTA nations so that each is able to support the other through collaborative research, through capacity building, and through shared examples of good practice. Working together through formal and informal diplomatic mechanisms, through public and traditional diplomacy, we should be looking to a longer-term vision to lift ambitions right across the globe and to bring substance to the idea that someone mentioned much earlier around how we can go about building back better. So I'll leave it there and pass on back to the chair, Professor CHOI.
Okay, thank you for your comments. And the Professor Byrne actually argues that she actually agree with that the middle power has a lot of potential in promoting multilateral cooperation, but we need to focus on the issues of the compliance and the commitment. And then also she proposed very useful suggestions for promoting multilateral cooperation by the middle powers. And our last discussant is the Professor Erika Ruiz Sandoval, a CIDE from Mexico, and then she will give the comments on both presentations. And could you start, please?
Thank you very much, Professor CHOI. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank all the organizers for having us meet, even if it's through Zoom, but it's always worth it to exchange ideas. I also have to say I have a close relationship with MIKTA because I've worked with it from both an academic perspective and a public policy perspective. The reporting by which we decided to participate in MIKTA in Mexico was basically written on my desk. And I was also a senior official for MIKTA. So I do know both worlds. I know how we academics try and give attributes to these creations in many ways, and sometimes are frustrated by the fact that there's a capabilities expectations gap that we don't seem to understand. But I've also worked with it from the public policy perspective, and I know it's hard to move the car forward and convince people that this is a useful resource. I have to say that COVID-19, and as we have seen through the discussions during the whole day, has basically revealed many things about the world we live in that perhaps we knew deep down inside us, but we were not willing to acknowledge. I think at this point in time, it was as if we went through an X-ray machine and finally discovered that we have some tumors, some broken bones, and some things lacking that we need to fix if we want to continue with our lives in terms of the general international community. I think we also tend to say that we're all in this together. Yes, we are going through the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. Even within MIKTA, we're not in the same boat. I think Professor Parlar's tables are very revealing in terms of the differences that the pandemic has created among our countries. The number of deceased people is definitely not comparable from Mexico to Korea, for example. I mean, Korea is talking about 300 something deaths, while we're the data for today is 72,000 dead people as acknowledged by the government. So we're in very different universes in that sense. I think we're depending perhaps too much on historical analogies, and we're trying to find our way through these historical analogies, but we're going through a very new and different era, and we're moving towards the unknown, basically, and that creates a lot of uncertainty and of fear. And fear is definitely a bad counselor for everybody, for policymakers, for academics, for researchers. We should try and prevent falling into the abyss of fear, because that will not allow us to think clearly. The other danger, I think, and we've seen it through the discussions today, is that we're thinking from a static perspective. We're thinking that we're going to come out of this the same way we entered it, that we are still going to be middle powers, that we're still going to be middle income countries, that we're still going to be having that same space in the international scenario that we think we deserve or have, and that we don't know for sure, because for many of our countries, even within MIKTA, the reality at the end will be very different, at least from the predictions in terms of GDP fall. In the case of Mexico, almost 12% this year. The number of poor people that are going to enter that sector of the population is going to be huge. We're talking about 10 million in Mexico. So I think that positions us in a very different place from the one we had in 2013 when we started talking about MIKTA. I think also that with MIKTA, we've taken a really long time to build MIKTA. That is not a criticism, it's a fact. We've had a lot of trouble trying to define it. What is it? We just keep spelling it out. What's MIKTA? Well, it's Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia, but we're still having trouble saying if it's a partnership, if it's an informal grouping, if it's a space. In Spanish, we call it a space, whatever that means. And it gives us a lot of trouble if we don't even know what we are and what we're here for. Definitions also include that we're the bathroom break group from the G20. Well, that's okay, but we still need to do something else. And we've done a lot of soul searching, and I think we can see that through all the communiques and the statements we've published as MIKTA. I mean, we've talked about everything: terrorism, Ebola, catastrophes, now COVID-19. We're trying to find our place and thinking about global self-governance as a possible niche is a good idea. I think it's the topic du jour. We definitely could find a place there, but we cannot forget that it's being geopoliticized. Health, it has become another tool of geopolitics. And we've seen it with the vaccine, as Professor Choi just explained. The rich countries are getting greater access to the vaccine, and all the others are trying to make an equitable and inclusive distribution of the vaccine, because again, we're all going through the same storm, but we don't all have the same means to participate in a war for the vaccine or in a race for the vaccine. And although the multilateral solution seems obvious, seems logical, we should all work together to get this done or worked out the best way possible, it doesn't seem to be politically feasible at this point in time. And I don't know if MIKTA has the clout at this point in time to choose global health governance as the niche, because all of a sudden it's not a soft issue or something where collaboration is obvious, but it has become weaponized in a sense. It has become part of the clash between great powers, of the race for more and more space within the international scene. I think we've taken a long time, but I also think we've learned a lot from each other in terms of how to deal with each other. It was mentioned by Professor Fitriani. We didn't know each other. Mexico is really, really far away. I once had to travel to Indonesia, and I discovered that it was exactly on the opposite side of the world. It took the same amount of time to travel through the Atlantic or through the Pacific for me. So we're definitely far away in that sense. And so we didn't know each other before, and now we're learning the ropes of how to deal with each other and what are our strengths and our weaknesses, etc. It also is important to remember what Professor Fitriani mentioned. We're not a priority for our governments as MIKTA. MIKTA seems to be an afterthought many times. It's something that once we work with it seems logical and seems useful, but it takes a lot of effort to get the wills together to actually think about MIKTA and use it as a tool, as a resource, as something that increases our power, our voice, or gives us a better standing in the world. So I think at this, there are many writings these days about what the world after COVID-19 will be like. And I think we're seeing a huge return of politics. And in that sense, I think MIKTA should also think about that. We need to learn to speak the language of politics. We need to figure out a way to be political in this world and to express our will and perhaps the will of other middle powers and of other regions that are just trying to be seen in the world today when we're going back to the whole great power clash. And as Professor Choi mentioned, the balance of power world again. We cannot play a role there. We were not going to balance one power against another. So we definitely need to find another space. So in the end, I do believe that we should first start at home, start at MIKTA. Let's improve ourselves before we decide to go and venture into the unknown with whatever niche we can find, we can work with together. I think the other logical niche, as Professor Parlar mentioned, is sustainable development, the environment, climate change. This is coming, and it's coming strong to our own countries. So we definitely have something to do there, and we've learned a lot after the pandemic. Now, I was just asking a friend of mine in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico, have the MIKTA scientists met to talk about COVID-19? Not yet. It's in the works, but not yet. Well, I think it's high time they met. I think we've done a lot of top-down MIKTA. We need to do a lot more bottom-up MIKTA and a lot more of connecting communities and exchanging experiences. If scientists in MIKTA have not met yet, that means we haven't learned from each other yet useful lessons about the pandemic, how we've dealt with it, how we've made mistakes, or what are our good things in terms of dealing with the pandemic. Well, again, it's high time we started doing that first among the MIKTA members, and then we can go and see if we have a place in the world for us middle powers to talk about important and relevant issues in the world to come. Thank you so much.
Okay, Professor Professor Sandoval, and Professor Sandoval mentioned that despite of the similar status among MIKTA countries, but there are still, very, big differences among the member states. Therefore, we consider these, differences more seriously and try to find a way to coordinate those differences. And thank you for your comments. And then now we will go back to the presenters, and then actually 3 discussants give the very important and useful comments on the 2 presentations. If 2 presenters want to respond to those comments, please do so. But within 3 minutes would be greatly appreciated. If
Thank you,
Dr.
Professor
Fitriani,
Choi.
yeah.
Sorry. Yes. Thank you, Professor Choi, and thank you, Professor Choi Hyunjin, for commenting on my presentation. I think your comments are very, very useful to enhance more our understanding on the circumstances that are facing by MIKTA at the moment, especially when you mentioned the balance of power politics among major powers that really a problem for us now in the era of COVID-19. Before COVID-19 era, it's already make difficult, but with this kind of circumstances, it's put us much more difficult situation. But your last explanation about WHO effort to pool resources of 170 countries to for a kind of cooperation, multilateral cooperation to provide a vaccine, I think is a kind of hopeful also for us. It's sure to us that actually, yes, major power have a competition, but doesn't mean that we cannot do anything else apart from their competition. So, and this effort by WHO on the collaboration on the vaccine, I think is one of the area that MIKTA can enhance its position. And I agree with Kathleen and doctors and Erika that it is time for MIKTA to show and to realize our potential. There is no better time. Perhaps this is the time to show that MIKTA is relevant and it is useful. Because in this kind of circumstances, MIKTA has potential. And we can start from collaboration on the vaccine, perhaps. Collaboration on the providing a better ideas on the global health governance to go beyond vaccine. So to think our world beyond vaccine. But I think maybe in the short term, thinking about how can these 5 countries in MIKTA can also, sorry, this is Friday morning time, so it's very noisy in Jakarta and Indonesia is particularly. I think it's, so in this COVID era, I think MIKTA can also collaborate to push forward some arrangement for a fair access and inclusive access for the vaccine. Maybe we should push Minister of Health in each country, or maybe scholars on public health in each of our country to start to meet together. I can encourage my colleague from the Faculty of Public Health to get in touch, or maybe if we can facilitate them to get in touch and start discussion. How can, because it is their area, public health, but maybe we can support them from behind, start thinking about more possibility for these 5 countries to collaborate. And then later on, maybe scholars like us in international relations can join them to discuss on what we think more fair and global governance for the future. So just my response is very much start to pin down our macro discussion to a more realistic or maybe possible step ahead for MIKTA to show its relevance. So thank you again for all panelists for your commenter. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next, Dr. Parlar, do you have a, yeah. Actually, could you turn on the, Dr. Parlar, we cannot hear you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I think they did. Thank you very much for your comments. First of all, I would like to thank Caitlin and Erika for their fruitful comments to my paper. And I fully share with their suggestions, especially with Caitlin's suggestion about preparing compliance reports. Perhaps, I don't know, in two years ago when I was first invited to a MIKTA academic dialogue by an Indonesian colleague working in the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I had written in my email that perhaps we can think of establishing a sort of MIKTA working group and trying to publish compliance reports as did University of Toronto, as did by university as John Curtin and his team are doing each annual summit. So I think it can be useful. It can be a useful tool in order to increase the functionality of MIKTA in the eyes of its members. Because I think the problem, one of the biggest problem of MIKTA is related with the belonging of, with the problem related with the ideational problems, I think. For example, I would like to talk about with Turkey's Turkish idea about MIKTA. When I first did my first research on Turkey's position in MIKTA and how Turkey look at MIKTA, etc., I realized that Turkey doesn't have a real middle power identity. So perhaps this is why Turkey has adopted a lower stance against MIKTA. So this kind of socialization problems exist among members. So MIKTA, please, as scholars, we must accept MIKTA as an evolving structure, as an evolving grouping. So socialization is still ongoing. So while looking at MIKTA's policies, or while considering MIKTA's deficiencies and potentialities, we must always take into account this ongoing socialization process. It is an evolving structure. I think this is a very important proposition. Compliance reports can increase MIKTA members' understanding of MIKTA, and perhaps this can help them push themselves to comply with their own commitments done at the annual summits or at the foreign ministers' meetings, etc. Another comment which was very interesting was Erika's comment regarding the different possibilities, the different stories of each MIKTA member. I think you are right. Each MIKTA member has different story, has different trajectories, but this pandemic can create a good opportunity for MIKTA members to create a common ground and to take common positions against a common problem, which is pandemic. Now we are at the stage of we are not at the initial stage of the pandemic outbreak. So during the distribution of vaccine and during the research on vaccine, perhaps this common space can be functionalized and can be much more operationalized among members. Another important topic regarding MIKTA's future policies is, as I stated in my presentation, perhaps I forgot, I couldn't go into details about this topic, is about MIKTA's possible role in global health assistance. I think it is very important if MIKTA members can act collectively in development cooperation, especially in the field of health sector. This can also improve MIKTA's status, because, as you know, most of the MIKTA members are important donors in the international development sector. So if they can come together and they can collaborate to give a common response to the third countries, to the least developed countries, and to create a loan, or I don't know what kind of structure, what kind of framework they can create. This can also be very useful for raising MIKTA's visibility and impact.
Okay, thank you very much. And then now actually we have only 5 minutes left, but the online audience sent us many interesting questions. So I actually selected a couple of them, but since we don't have enough time to cover all the questions, I actually would like to pick up one very simple and very strong questions. So the question is that what would be the most urgent task for this MIKTA cooperation in terms of the health governance? And then the second, it's kind of same question. And what kind of, what is the most important values this MIKTA cooperation should pursue? So my question is, what is the most urgent task? And then what kind of the, values that these MIKTA countries should pursue for their multilateral cooperation? This question is open for every panelist. So any volunteer? Okay.
Go ahead. Can I try to answer the first question? I think maybe cooperation if we do not produce, but at least we distribute a vaccine for all. For at least we collaborate to prove that MIKTA is useful and relevant. Collaborate in vaccine. Not maybe product can also distribution or research is also still possible, because what vaccine doing now is making under pressure, and maybe it's not a perfect. So maybe MIKTA can slowly develop a better vaccine by start collaboration. I think it's to prove that our relevance. That's maybe for the first question. Thank you.
Maybe I'll jump in as well now. Oh, sorry, Professor Choi, were you speaking? No. Okay. I wonder if there's an opportunity for MIKTA nations to fairly urgently share experiences on test and tracing. One of the things I thought was so interesting is the very different experiences that have occurred across the different MIKTA countries, and yet we have also all had spikes in outbreaks in different parts, and we've responded to those differently. So I think we can learn a lot from each other just in how we've been managing the testing and tracing process, and how that has helped to suppress the pandemic in communities. The other area I would say we need to urgently talk about further is the impact of COVID-19 on women, whether that relates to women in healthcare, women in the workforce, and women experiencing more domestic violence. We know that COVID-19 is having a disproportionate impact on women in all of those domains, and we should be doing more to actually address that. I think that will be a key issue for the G20, hopefully. Going forward, then that's something we could potentially get some traction on.
Okay, thank you. And actually, time's up. So this is all for this session. And I would like to thank you all the panelists and audiences for their active participation. And I hope all of you can stay healthy and strong. And thank you very much.
Thank you, moderator. Thank you.